I am Bryce of the Cinder Archive, and this is Chapter 12, The Itch That Wouldn't Quiet. The story of the kettle is the story Geary always told first, and told easiest, because it cost him nothing to tell. This one he told less often, and never quite as lightly, though for years he told it anyway, at parties, over drinks, as proof of how far he'd come since the boy with the burnt fingers and the borrowed workshop. It is a warmer story than it has any right to be, given what it's actually about. It is the story of the first time someone who loved him looked him in the eye and told him he could stop. It is also the story of the first time he heard that, understood it, and kept going anyway. He never told this one at parties the way he told the kettle story. He told it, when he told it at all, quietly, to himself, on the nights the old itch came back and he wanted, briefly, to remember that someone had once tried to warn him it would. Some years have passed since the kettle whistled clean through a 2-year silence, and Geary Sterling has grown into most of what that morning promised. He is not yet 30. He holds no formal rank at the Gearwright Hall, and has stopped expecting to want won titles, he's fond of saying, are for people who need the hall to tell them they're good at something, and he has never once needed anyone to tell him that. What he has instead is reputation, the kind that precedes him into rooms and lingers after he leaves them, the man who fixed the West Siphon. Tonight, the hall is celebrating him for it properly, and the celebration has spilled out of the workshop floor and into the wide processional hall usually reserved for formal hall business, because no single room in the building was built to hold this many well-wishers at once. Lantern light hangs warm and gold from brass fixtures along the walls, doubled and redoubled in the polished floor, and the whole space smells of festival food and lamp oil and the particular celebratory polish someone always seems to find time to apply to brass railings before a night like this one. Long tables along one wall groan under more food than even this crowd will manage to finish. Roasted riverfowl, dense dark bread still warm from the ovens, a whole wheel of aged cheese someone's clearly imported specially for the occasion, and a trio of hired musicians works through the same 3 reels on a slight rotation near the far doors, cheerful and a little too loud, the way hired musicians always are when nobody's paying close enough attention to complain. Glasses rise every few minutes as some new knot of well-wishers works up the nerve to toast him directly, and Geary receives every single toast with the same easy, genuine warmth, because he has never once found large crowds of people telling him he's brilliant to be anything but delightful. The West Siphon had been failing for 11 years. A slow, grinding, city-scale version of the exact problem that used to live in Aldous Penn's teaching kettle, the venting lattice choking itself under load until the whole tower ran hotter and less efficiently every season. A fix so expensive and so structurally invasive that 3 separate hallmasters had, in turn, quietly decided it could wait for someone else's tenure. Geary did not wait. He spent the better part of a year redesigning the lattice from first principles. The same spiral knot widen instinct that once saved a kettle scaled up through 11 iterations until it could survive the pressures of an actual city siphon. And 3 weeks ago the tower came back online at full capacity for the first time in over a decade, and half the West District's evening lamps burn a fraction brighter for it, though almost none of the people whose lamps they are will ever know his name for it. The hall knows his name for it. The hall, tonight, seems fully prepared to say so, as many times as the evening allows. To Sterling, says a broad-shouldered senior artificer named Holbrook, raising his glass for what must be the 8th or 9th toast of the night, who took a problem 3 hallmasters were content to leave to the next generation, and solved it in less time than most of us would have spent arguing about whose department it belonged to. The room laughs warmly at the shape of the old institutional joke, and Geary laughs along with it, genuinely amused, raising his own glass in return. In my defense, he says, arguing about whose department it belonged to sounded considerably less interesting than actually fixing it. Modesty, someone calls out, not quite believing it, and gets another laugh. I contain very little of it, I'll admit, Geary says, but I promise you the diagnosis was the easy part. Ask anyone who spent the winter with me up in that tower's cooling gantry whether the actual work felt like modesty's natural habitat. He says it lightly, self-deprecating in exactly the register a room like this one wants from its favorite genius, and the room rewards him with more laughter, more raised glasses, the easy affection of an institution that has decided collectively, a long time ago now, that it likes this particular young man rather a great deal. A second artificer, older, thinner, with the ink-stained fingers of a career draftsman, raises her own cup from nearer the food tables. "To the boy who fixed my kettle," she calls, and it takes the room a beat to place her, Corin's former benchmate from a cohort now scattered across half the hall's departments, before the joke lands, and the laughter turns fonder still. "I taught the apprentice course 2 years after you left it, Sterling. Still tell your kettle story to every new cohort." "Hope you don't mind." "I insist on it," Geary calls back. "Tell them the whistle part loud." "I've heard it's grown considerably since I actually built it." "Grown a full 3 feet in the retelling, last I checked." "Then it's doing exactly what a good story is meant to do." More laughter, more warmth, and Geary drinks to it with the same unguarded pleasure he's shown all night. There is, genuinely, nothing performed in how much he enjoys being liked. Whatever else about tonight will later come to look, in hindsight, like performance of a different kind. He moves through the celebration the way he moves through most rooms, unhurried, genuinely present with whoever's in front of him, generous with his attention in a way that makes each conversation feel, briefly, like the only one happening. He answers technical questions from junior apprentices with real patience, accepts an over-enthusiastic hug from Corin, grayer now at the temples than the boy who once shared terrible workshop tea with him, still every bit as fond, and endures, with visible good humor, a lengthy and slightly drunken speech from Halbrook about the future of siphon engineering that seems to have very little to do with Geary specifically, and a great deal to do with Halbrook's own opinions on departmental funding. "You know what I keep thinking about," Corin says, arm still slung companionably around Geary's shoulders, 2 cups deep into an evening that will leave him regretting a third. "Is that kettle. 10 years now, near enough, and I still tell people about it. Whistled clean through, first try, angle you'd worked out on scrap vellum at 3 in the morning. He shakes his head, grinning, genuinely delighted by the memory, rather than merely performing delight for the room. "You were insufferable that whole week." "I remain insufferable. You've simply grown used to it." "I have, rather." Corin's grin softens, just slightly, into something more sincere. "Proud of you, Sterling, genuinely. 11 years that tower sat broken, and 3 hall masters too frightened to touch it, and you just went and fixed it, same as you fixed my terrible tea brewing that one time. Like it never occurred to you the thing could stay broken." He claps Geary once on the shoulder, warm and easy, and drifts off toward the fruit tables in search of his interrupted third cup, and Geary watches him go with real fondness, the specific fondness reserved for a friend who has known you since before any of this. The reputation, the acclaim, the 11-day miracles was something anyone expected of you. And yet, somewhere in the third hour of it, between one conversation and the next, his eyes drift, not far, not obviously, nothing anyone in the room would think twice about noticing, to a side table near the hall's edge, where a stack of blank sketch paper sits beside an unused inkwell, left there by some clerk's oversight from an earlier hall function. He looks at the blank page longer than the moment requires. Something in his expression, for just a breath, goes somewhere else entirely, not unhappy, not distracted in any way that would trouble a casual observer, simply elsewhere, the specific elsewhere of a mind that has already, quietly, started solving a problem nobody in this room has thought to hand him yet. It passes in a second. He's laughing at something Corin said before anyone could have caught it, and the celebration goes on warm and golden and entirely unaware that its guest of honor has already, in some small back room of himself, begun leaving it. He leaves properly a little after midnight, when the toasts have thinned into looser, drunker conversation, and nobody will notice one guest of honor slipping quietly toward the workshop wing instead of toward his own bed. The processional hall's noise follows him partway down the corridor. Laughter, someone's off-key attempt at a drinking song, the general contented roar of an institution enjoying itself, and fades by degrees into the workshop floor's familiar off-hours quiet banked coals, cooling metal, the particular hush of a room built for daytime industry currently holding its breath until morning. The corridor's lamps have been trimmed low for the night shift that isn't coming, and his own footsteps sound, for a moment, unfamiliar to him in the emptiness. Too loud, too solitary after 3 straight hours of never once being able to hear himself walk. His own bench sits exactly as he left it 3 weeks ago, mid-refit, half buried under siphon schematics he hasn't yet bothered to file away properly. He doesn't sit there. He crosses instead to a smaller table near the workshop's far corner, his unofficially, the way certain corners of certain rooms become a person simply through years of habitual use, and pulls a single sheet of fresh vellum toward himself, and picks up a pencil, and begins, before he has consciously decided to begin anything, to sketch. It isn't the siphon work. The siphon work is finished, celebrated, done, 3 weeks old, and already, in some part of him that has never quite learned how to let a finished thing simply stay finished, starting to feel less like an achievement and more like a chapter he's already turned the page on. What his pencil moves toward instead is something looser, less defined, barely a shape yet at all, a rough suggestion of articulated joints, a housing sketch that isn't quite armor and isn't quite scaffolding, something meant to move the way a body moves, rather than the way a tower stands still. He doesn't have a name for it. He doesn't, if he's honest with the part of himself capable of being honest at midnight after 4 glasses of celebratory wine, entirely have a reason for it yet, beyond the plain physical fact that his hands have wanted to be doing something more difficult than accepting toast for the better part of 3 hours, and this is the most difficult thing currently available to want. The candle beside him gutters low, throwing long shadows across the vellum, and somewhere behind him, faint and far off, the party continues without him. A burst of laughter, a snatch of song, the sound of an institution being happy in a room he's chosen, for reasons he hasn't examined too closely, not to be happy and along with it. He is deep enough into the sketch. 3 failed joint articulations scratched out, a 4th taking rough shape, that he doesn't hear the workshop door until it's already closing. The candle's light catches the door's edge as it swings shut, throwing a brief wedge of brighter corridor lamp glow across the floor before it narrows and disappears, and for a moment neither of them says anything at all. Geary still bent over the vellum, pencil moving, and Essa standing just inside the threshold, watching him, with an expression he can't see and doesn't yet know he needs to. I wondered where you'd gotten to. Essa Farrow has known Geary Sterling for 6 years, has loved him, in the specific complicated way of 2 people who work alongside each other, and have let that proximity become something else, for most of 4 of them, and she crosses the workshop floor now with the particular tired fondness of a woman who has found this exact scene, Geary, alone, sketching something new while an entire room celebrates the last thing he built, more times than either of them would probably want counted aloud. She is an artificer in her own right, Gearwright trained same as him, though her gift runs toward precision work rather than his sweeping structural instincts, clockwork mechanisms, fine calibration, the kind of careful, patient craft that has never once needed a whole city watching to feel worthwhile. She has flower-white scarring across 2 knuckles on her left hand, old enough now to have stopped hurting, from an early apprentice accident neither of them ever needs to bring up anymore. Tonight she still wears the good dress she wore to his celebration, though she's pulled the shawl off her shoulders somewhere between the hall and here, and there's wine flush still faintly visible in her cheeks that has nothing to do with anger, and everything to do with having genuinely, happily celebrated him for 3 hours before noticing he'd gone. She danced twice, she'll tell him later, once with Corin and once, badly, alone, before she'd looked up from the second dance and realized the room's guest of honor had somehow slipped out from under his own party, without a single person seeming to notice the exact moment it happened. You wondered for about 4 minutes, Geary says, not looking up from the vellum, though something in his shoulders has already softened at the sound of her voice, the specific ease of a man who has never once needed to perform for the one person in the room who already knows exactly what he's doing. I'd give you credit for longer than that, but I know how fast you walk when you're annoyed. I'm not annoyed. You're something in that family. Essa crosses the last of the distance and looks down at the sketch over his shoulder. Loose joint articulations, the not quite armor housing, the whole rough, half-formed suggestion of a shape that has no business existing yet, 3 weeks after the last thing he built nearly cost him a full year of his life. She doesn't say anything for a moment. She has learned over 6 years that the first thing she wants to say to Geary Sterling at a moment like this is rarely the most useful thing to actually say. "It's good work," she says instead, and means it. She can see, even in 3 scratched-out attempts and 1 half-formed fourth, the same structural intelligence that redesigned an entire siphon lattice from first principles. Whatever it is. I don't entirely know what it is yet. That's never stopped you sketching something before. She pulls the stool close, sits, close enough that her knee brushes his under the table. An old, comfortable habit neither of them thinks about anymore. Geary, look at me a moment. He does, finally setting the pencil down, and there's real warmth in his face when he does it. No performance in this. None of the charm he spent all night spending on a room full of well-wishers, just plain, unguarded fondness for the specific person in front of him. The tower's fixed, Essa says, quiet, direct, the words of someone who has been building towards saying this for longer than tonight. 11 years, 3 hallmasters too frightened to touch it, and you solved it in under a year. There's a whole room back there that's been celebrating you for 3 straight hours, and would happily celebrate you for 3 more if you let them. You don't have anything left to prove, Geary. Not to the hall. Not to Halbrook, or the hallmaster, or whoever it was, 3 tenures ago, that decided the West Siphon could wait. Certainly not to me. Her hand comes to rest, gently, over the one still resting near the pencil, near the half-finished sketch, as though she could hold the hand still enough that the itch behind it might quiet along with it. This is enough. You're allowed to let it be enough, just this once, and just see how that feels. The words land somewhere real in him. Geary will remember, years from now, exactly how real they landed, though he will also remember, with considerably less charity toward himself, how quickly the feeling passed. For one honest moment, sitting there with her hand over his, and the candle guttering low, and the party's noise still faintly audible down the corridor, he lets himself actually consider it, what it would mean to simply stop. To let the siphon be the last hard thing he builds for a while. To sit in a room and be celebrated, and not already be halfway toward the next problem before the toasts have finished. It is, for that one moment, a genuinely appealing thought. I know, he says, and he means it, in the specific, incomplete way a person means something they're already quietly deciding not to act on. You're right. I don't need to prove anything else this year. That's not quite a yes. It's the truest thing I've got tonight. He turns his hand under hers, laces their fingers together, and there's real tenderness in the gesture. Nothing deflecting about the warmth of it, even as the rest of him is already, somewhere underneath the tenderness, still faintly humming with the shape of a joint articulation he hasn't solved yet. I hear you, Essa. I do. I'm not sketching this because the siphon wasn't enough. I'm sketching it because he pauses, searching, genuinely trying to find true words rather than merely comfortable ones, because my hands don't know how to be finished yet. That's not the same as not appreciating what we just finished. It's just a separate thing, running alongside it. It's the same thing, Geary. It's always been the same thing. That's rather what worries me. Essa's voice stays gentle, but there's real weight under the gentleness now, the weight of someone who has watched this exact pattern enough times to recognize it wearing a new sketch instead of an old one. I'm not asking you to stop being brilliant. I could never ask that, and I wouldn't want to even if I could. I'm asking whether you're capable of being brilliant and finished even once, or whether every good thing you build is just going to be the doorway into the next thing you haven't built yet. He doesn't have a ready answer for that. He wants to. Some part of him reaches for the easy, charming deflection that's carried him through 100 smaller versions of this exact conversation. The joke that would turn her seriousness aside without quite dismissing it. And for once, sitting here with her hand still laced through his, he doesn't quite reach for it fast enough to stop the honest silence from landing first. I don't know, he says, finally, quiet, and it costs him something small and real to say it. I don't know if I can. I've never actually tried to find out. Would you if I asked you to? Really asked. Not just tonight, not just because I caught you at it. Essa's thumb moves once absently across his knuckles, an old, unconscious gesture. Not forever. I'm not asking you to stop being an artificer, or stop having ideas, or stop being the person who sees a broken kettle and can't leave it broken. I like that person. I've built a good part of my own life around loving that person. I'm asking whether you could go a single season, one season, Geary, without starting something new the moment the last thing stops needing you. He's quiet for a long moment, turning the question over with more genuine care than he's given anything. All night, including the siphon itself. "I don't know," he says again, and this time it sounds less like deflection and more like an honest, slightly frightened admission. "I want to say yes. I want to be the kind of person who could say yes to that easily. But I don't actually know, and I think that not knowing should probably worry me more than it does." "It worries me enough for both of us tonight," Essa says, which is probably why I came looking in the first place. Essa studies him for a long moment, and there's no anger in her face, only a tired, fond sorrow that he will remember far more clearly, years later, than he lets himself sit with tonight. "Then maybe start trying," she says. "Not tonight. I'm not asking you to burn the sketch, or pretend your hands have stopped wanting what they want. Just somewhere, sometime soon, actually try the version of yourself that lets a good thing be a good thing all the way through, without already reaching past it." She leans in, kisses him, gentle and unhurried, and there's real love in it, undiminished by the conversation they've just had. If anything sharpened by it, the specific tenderness of someone loving a person, clearly, including the parts of him she's genuinely worried about. "Come back to the party. Let them toast you a little longer. The sketch will still be here in the morning." He does go back with her in the end. Lets her pull him up from the stool, lets her fold the shawl back over her own shoulders, walks with her back down the corridor toward the noise and the lantern light and the room still fond enough of him to have not yet noticed how long he was gone. He is, for the rest of the night, genuinely present at his own celebration, laughing at the right moments, accepting the last round of toasts with real warmth, dancing once, badly at Corin's insistence, to a song none of them will remember the words to by morning. He even manages, for a good stretch of an hour, to forget the sketch entirely, swept up in Hal Brooks' increasingly incoherent theories about siphon funding, in Corin's genuine delight at showing off a new apprentice project, in the specific uncomplicated pleasure of being liked by a room full of people he likes back. But he does not stay in that mood forever, and Essa, watching him from across the room sometime near the party's end, sees exactly the moment his attention drifts again, briefly, almost imperceptibly, back toward the workshop wing, back toward a half-finished sketch. He has every intention of returning to the moment he can slip away cleanly. It isn't dramatic. He doesn't stop laughing, doesn't stop nodding along to whatever Hal Brooks currently saying. It's smaller than that. A half-second stillness behind his eyes, gone again before anyone else would think to notice it, the specific tell of a man whose attention has learned to hold two rooms at once without ever fully choosing between them. She says nothing about it. She has already said the truest thing she has to say tonight, and some part of her, tired and fond and not yet ready to call it anything harder than hopeful, decides to let the rest of the night simply be the celebration it's supposed to be. She dances with him once more before the musicians finally pack away their instruments, and if she holds him a fraction closer than the song strictly calls for, neither of them remarks on it, and the party winds down, eventually, the way all good parties do, slowly, then all at once, until the processional hall stands empty but for banked lanterns and the faint smell of spent wax. He returns to the workshop 3 nights later, when the last of the celebration's afterglow has properly faded, and the hall has moved on to its ordinary business, and this time there is no one to find him there. The days between have not been idle in any way that would look from the outside like anything worth remarking on. He's attended 2 routine hall meetings, signed off on a junior apprentice's prosthetic hinge proposal with real and generous attention, even let Essa talk him into an actual quiet evening at her rooms, wine and bread, and nothing more ambitious between them than a shared, comfortable silence. She'd cooked badly, and he'd eaten every bite and told her it was wonderful and meant it more than the food strictly deserved, and for a few hours it had been exactly the kind of evening she'd been asking for, 3 nights before, unhurried, uncomplicated, entirely present. If she noticed during any of it the specific way his eyes occasionally lost their focus mid-conversation, somewhere just past her shoulder, somewhere that wasn't quite the room they were sitting in, she didn't say so again, and he didn't offer. He'd told himself, each of those 2 evenings, that the sketch could wait. He believed it both times. It is, perhaps, the truest and least comfortable thing about him that he is never once lying when he says such things, only ever later mistaken. The sketch has grown in his absence, not on the page, which sits exactly where he left it, but in the part of him that never really stopped working on it, even while he was elsewhere being celebrated, laughing at toasts, folding S's shawl over her shoulders. He sits at the small corner table with a fresh sheet of vellum this time, the old one set aside, and begins again from a clearer, more deliberate place, the loose joint articulations of 3 nights ago sharpening now into something closer to an actual proposal. The workshop around him holds its usual off-hour stillness, banked coals ticking faintly as they cool, the high windows black with a moonless sky. The smell of solder and old oil that has by now become less a scent he notices, and more simply the smell of thinking clearly. It is, by any reasonable engineering standard, an absurd ambition. Not a siphon valve, not a prosthetic limb, or a piece of combat armor in the conventional Gearwright mold, though it borrows structurally from both. What takes shape under his pencil over the following hours is something closer to a full integration, arcane steam power routed not around a wearer's body, but genuinely through it, joint for joint, breath for breath. A suit that would not simply protect or assist the person inside it, but would, in some sense he doesn't yet have language for, think alongside them. Nothing currently built in Ether Glen approaches this scale of integration. Nothing, so far as he's aware, has ever been attempted at this scale of integration, and the plain, honest reason nobody's attempted it is that no specific problem currently facing the city actually requires it. He does not have a client. He does not have a commission, a hall directive, a single practical need that this design would meaningfully solve better than a dozen smaller, safer, more targeted inventions already could. What he has, sitting alone at a corner table 3 nights after being told, gently and by someone who loves him, that he's allowed to be finished, is simply the itch, the same itch that fixed the 2-year broken kettle in one all-night sitting at 17, scaled now, quietly, dangerously, to a size that has stopped fitting inside any single night's work. He tells himself, sketching late into the small hours, that he's only curious, that this is simply what an idle, well-earned mind does when it's allowed to wander without a deadline attached, an exercise, nothing more. The kind of ambitious daydream every artificer indulges occasionally, and most eventually sets aside. He believes this, in the moment, with the same complete sincerity he believed, 3 nights ago, that he genuinely tried to let a good thing be enough. Both things are true of him at once, in the specific human way that a person can mean something honestly and still, somehow act as though they never said it. There is, if he were inclined to look for it, a version of tonight where he notices the pattern plainly, the kettle at 17, fixed the same night he was first told, gently, to consider stopping. The siphon at not quite 30, celebrated for 11 days' work while his hands were already, within hours, reaching for something no one had asked him to build. He is not, by any honest measure, a man who lacks the intelligence to see a pattern this simple laid out twice across a decade of his own life. He is, tonight, simply not looking for it, not out of any deliberate refusal, but because the sketch in front of him is more interesting than the question of why he keeps needing one, and interesting has always, for as long as he can remember, won out over important whenever the two have been foolish enough to compete for his attention on the same night. The candle burns down twice over the course of the night, and he replaces it without noticing he's done so, feeding fresh wax into the same worn brass holder with the automatic, unthinking economy of a man whose hands know a workshop's rhythms better than his conscious mind is currently tracking anything at all. Somewhere past the second candle, the design has stopped looking like an idle exercise and started looking, unmistakably, like the beginning of an actual project. The joint articulations no longer merely sketched but annotated now, measurements penciled into the margins, a rough materials list started and half abandoned in the corner where he keeps running out of room to write. One that will need a name, eventually, the way every serious Gearwright undertaking needs a name, if only so the eventual paperwork has somewhere to go. He sets the pencil down sometime near dawn, and sits back, and looks at what he's built on paper with the particular, quiet satisfaction of a man who knows, without needing anyone else to confirm it, that he's on to something considerably larger than anything he's attempted before. His back aches from hours bent over the small corner table. His fingers have gone stiff around the pencil in a way that will bother him more once the satisfaction wears off. Neither discomfort registers yet as anything worth stopping for. There is a blank line at the top of the page, left deliberately empty through the whole long night's work, the way a title page is always left for last. Not because the name matters more than the design, but because a name, once written, makes a thing real in a way a sketch alone never quite does. He sets his pencil against that blank line now and pauses, the nib hovering a half-inch above the vellum, and for just a moment considers something more personal, some private name, the kind a person gives a project that still belongs only to them, before the hall's registries and cross-reference drums get hold of it and turn it into paperwork. He does not let himself examine, even briefly, whose name it might have been if he'd let the impulse finish arriving. He does not write that name. Some instinct he doesn't examine too closely, administrative habit, or a small private wish to keep this particular ambition at a certain distance from himself, even as he begins it, pulls him toward something plainer instead, the kind of designation that could sit comfortably in a hall ledger without drawing any more attention to itself than any other project number would. He writes Mark I at the top of the page in his own steady hand, and sets the pencil down, and the ink sits there, dark and ordinary and utterly unremarkable, drying slowly in the gray light just beginning to find its way through the workshop's high windows. It is, in the moment, nothing more than an administrative choice. A convenient label for a project that needs one, chosen the same unthinking way he'd have labeled a valve schematic or a hinge diagram, filed away in the same mental drawer as every other piece of paperwork a serious project eventually requires. He does not sit with the words the way he sat 3 nights ago, with S's hand over his. Does not feel, writing them, anything like the weight they will eventually come to carry, for him, for the party who will one day chase 5 field-tested echoes of this exact page across half a continent, for a suit that will one day take the same designation and its own act of rebellion, discarded entirely for a name of its own choosing. He simply writes it the way a man writes any beginning, without knowing, yet, that it is one. Outside, sky over the Gearwright Hall's high windows continues its slow, indifferent slide toward morning, and somewhere across the city, in rooms that don't yet know what these 2 words will eventually cost them, Etherglen goes on sleeping through the last ordinary dawn it will have for some time.